Women's rights, the fight for the idea that women should have equal rights with men. Over the course of history, this has taken the form of gaining property rights, women's suffrage, right to vote, reproductive rights, and the right to work for equal pay.
Personally, my thinking is to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed. The Equal Rights Amendment was written in 1923 by Alice Paul, who was a suffragette, and she worked really hard to get the right to vote. And once the 19th Amendment was established, then she went to work realizing that, yes, women had the right to vote, but they were a long, long way from equal rights.
Gradually, instead of a little tiny cluster, we now have 10 million women backing this particular measure before Congress. That's 10 million women who've united through their organizations.
Throughout the course of time, women have been restricted their rights and looked down upon as weak and not worthy of doing a man's job. They are excluded and disadvantaged from decision-making and access to economic and social resources. It is difficult for them to hold positions in government, have a say in politics, or acquire proper recognition for their achievements. They are restricted against the socially constructed roles and responsibilities that society considers appropriate for women.
For me, I think definitions of feminism differ from person to person, and for me, it's an evolving definition that started way back in our country, first from our second First Lady, John Adams' wife, who said, don't forget the ladies. And then through the suffragette movement, through the women's rights movements of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and until now where we're seeing the Women's March, where we're seeing the Me Too movement, where we're seeing the We Said Enough movement. It's this ever-evolving movement to try to create an environment in America where all people are truly created equal.
Yet, gender issues are not focused on women alone, but rather on the relationship between men and women. Gender equality does not mean that men and women will become the same, but that men's and women's rights, opportunities, and responsibilities will not depend on whether they are male or female.
I would also say that one of the biggest issues to highlight is that feminism is for everyone, and feminism is not just for women who are seeking equality, but it also needs to involve allies, and even that includes men who know when to step back and let women speak. And support women, and that's something that I think is a misnomer, that it's not just for women, but it's literally for everyone involved, and feminism lifts up the entire community.
Some people view feminism and the women's rights movement as a matter that solely impacts women and only women need to fight for change. But in order for the women's rights movement to progress, both men and women will need to work together and acknowledge the basic human rights that both men and women deserve.
And incidentally, the name Now, it came about because at that luncheon, Betty Friedan wrote on a napkin, NOW, National Organization for Women. And she stressed it was for women, not of women, because we were going to have men active, and we've had wonderful men who have been active through the years.
This fight for equality has caused many feminist organizations to maximize their work for the community and advocate for what they believe in. The Femdems of Sacramento, for example, work hard to promote the feminist principles of political, economic, and social equality between the sexes.
Feminism, a lot of the times we see it as just like this big movement, right? Like the women's movement, and a lot of the times the visions that come up are things that you remember are like the suffragette movement, right? All of them marching in the streets of New York, or it's like these big dramatic movements. But really, Femdems, what we work on is like those little things, the everyday things. So it's endorsing those like local candidates, right? Staying involved on the ground level, doing those little everyday things that aren't glamorous, they're not profound in any way.
An American, in its simplest definition, is a native or a citizen of the United States. Nowhere does this definition specify a gender or race. An American can be a man or a woman or whichever and whatever that person chooses to identify as. An American has unalienable rights to certain freedoms despite what gender they are or choose to associate with, and in order to preserve those rights, Both men and women need to end the battle of the sexes and fight for equality in all areas, from the workforce to schools. Putting more women in office and acknowledging that women can be just as smart, strong, and independent as men will have us one step closer to achieving equity.